Welcome back to another episode of the People Championing podcast powered by 𝐂𝐲 I'm Raf, and today I'm really excited for this discussion we have lined up. As you may figure by now, you've seen I'm a massive fan of documentation. I believe documentation is a critical pillar for any business, but even more essentially for startups, scale ups, SMEs who are essentially really taking that leap from zero to one and to one and beyond. I'm sure we're all aware of those very successful scale ups that actually got there and how they actually created a culture of documentation in the early days to really power knowledge sharing, getting the very founding teams all the way through to the big businesses that they've become today with the knowledge that they needed to actually become as commercially performing as they can be. So basically, I am very lucky to welcome two amazing guests today who have been there, done that several times over and over. So let's meet them. Let's start off with our first guest, Virgile Raingeard, the founder of Figures, a collaborative compensation platform that enables organizations to better care for their people. This is built on top of Virgile's extensive experience in people leader roles at companies like 𝐓𝐡𝐞 𝐏𝐞 and 𝐿𝐿. Welcome, Virgile. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me, Rafael.
Fantastic. And second, we have Sarah-Emily Oades, Chief People Officer and SVP of Operations for 𝐄𝐲 Health. She's also led the people functioning at companies like Booking.com, Uber, Sion, and more. So, wow, quite a legend we have here. Welcome, SVP.
Thank you. My pleasure to be here.
So good. I'm very excited to kick things off. So, yeah, before I'd love to introduce yourselves to our listeners. Maybe Sarah, let's start with you. Can you share a bit about your career journey and what you're focused on today at 𝐄𝐲 Health and beyond?
Sure. I started life as a lawyer, so I still refer to myself as a recovering lawyer because I'm still in recovery. Moved into the people space, primarily talent, then the generic people space, and then over the last sort of 4 to 5 years, more into the ops space as well. Actually was doing some consulting. 𝐶𝐲 was one of my clients, and now I'm here. So that's the really short version. I've spent time with some great brands, learned a lot about how to do things really well and how to not do them very well. And I hope that I carry through both of those lessons into helping my organization grow.
That's fantastic. Virgil, over to you now. Can you tell us a bit about your career path and how it influenced into the creation of building Figures from the grassroots up?
Well, I'm a recovering compensation specialist. I'd say put it that way. I started my career in compensation, and then I moved to more generalist HR or people roles over 10 to 11 years. I did so in very large organization and progressively smaller and smaller organization. Each time I felt like I wanted to go down a notch to something more faster and more agile, right? And then in the end, I went down to the smallest organization possible because I launched Figures nearly 4 years ago to this day. And the whole thing about Figures is I was frustrated when I was in HR about the lack of proper tooling around compensation and compensation management, right? Running those endless, painful compensation reviews, even it's like 2,000 to 3,000 employees based on hundreds of Excel files was my worst nightmare. And so I went on to the journey of trying to create a better product, or a product I would have loved to use back when I was a HR professional. That's my story.
That's amazing. I'm sure it's impacting the lives of hundreds, if not thousands, of HR managers and people ops leaders world of, like, over. So well done.
Hopefully.
I'm a big fan of Figures, so fantastic to have you. Great stuff. So let's start looking into a topic that I am a big fan here at 𝐂𝐲. We'll obviously be talking about documentation today, but I think we can start tapping into organizational culture, as this is something we're quite closely looking at here at 𝐂𝐲 as we expand, and how we can actually document everything related to our culture here at 𝐓𝐡𝐞, so that every new joiner actually breathes that from the very first day as they actually start to really make an impact on their role onwards. Also, it's one of those things us business leaders know as a fundamental as our growth journeys really unravel, and that it should be looked at sooner rather than later. But you guys know, like, we're so busy, we end up putting that on the back seat. It ends up being kicked down the road. So I would love to learn from both of you how you guys have actually gone about in uh, having that really happening in the previous businesses you've worked at, but also today at Figures and at 𝐂𝐞. Sarah, let's start with you. I would love to hear your thoughts on this.
Yeah, I feel like I should always start with where I've learned it not going so well. I won't name names because, I shouldn't do that. But I will certainly say that there are companies where they've lost out on this documentation element, or it's been done inconsistently or not by the right people. So those are kind of the pitfalls for me, that these three buckets that you fall into. And so then it led to sort of a lack of alignment, or just, horrible times in communication, or just a really inconsistent onboarding experience. And the inconsistencies are what ultimately breed it not working, right? I think the things that I've seen work really well is when you use, I'll use names of companies we've used. I'm not saying they're better than anyone else, right? But these are just some of the companies we've used. So I've used Confluence for this. I've used Coda. I've used Notion. I've used 𝐓𝐿𝐻𝐿. I know there's lots of others out there, but I think ultimately all of these platforms have been really good where they have been used, because they allow this kind of crowdsourcing from lots of different people. And I think the most dangerous thing about culture is the misconception is that one team needs to own it, usually the people team. And that is so inaccurate. And in order to combat that, I think this crowdsourcing mentality around, just making sure that you are getting not just your core values, but your ways of working, that has to come from the whole team that's existing, that you're bringing these new people into. And so in order to allow it to grow healthily, that's kind of what it's looked like. So the best ones I've seen are when it has been documented on a platform where everyone is invited to contribute. And there's a moderator, because you want to make sure there's consistency and it's searchable and all the rest of it. Those are all very practical, important steps. But the best things I've seen is where we've used Notion, 𝐓𝐿𝐻, or a couple of the others that I've mentioned. Not keen to name names, but there you go. That gives you an idea of how it's gone really, really well. And when it's not going so well, it's been a couple of Google Docs and no one reads them. So
Yeah. Oh, that's the nightmare. In fact,
yeah.
it's the main pain we want to solve here at 𝐓𝐡𝐞, like having scattered knowledge all over the place that ends up not being actionable. Virgil, what in your view are the specific risks of actually not being able to document that in terms of culture, but especially when we're actually growing so fast, right? Because there's obviously that day-to-day fire that needs to be put down, the growth that we need to achieve, and so we end up going towards that rather than this, if you know what I mean. Just because simply it's not going to be something that we're going to immediately feel the bite, but I would love to hear like how you have been able to actually juggle things around in a point of view of actually maintaining cohesive culture, documenting your mission, vision, and values, value proposition, USP, business differentiators. What's your secret, man?
I'm not sure I have a secret, right? But I think to your point, I've worked previously to Figures. I think I've worked in organizations that were not great at documenting, because they had cultures centered around oral communication. Like very specifically, when I worked at 𝐓𝐞, who had an amazing culture, right? We had an amazing culture, but it was one very much centered around, one of our principles was, if you have something you want to know, just get up, stand up, and go to the person's desk, right? It had a culture very centered around oral discussion, informal discussion, centered around let's go at the whiteboard and discuss things around, which, by the way, was a problem down the line. We're not very remote friendly type of cultures. So when I started 𝐶ulture first by myself, but then with my co-founder Bastien joining me, we knew we wanted to have a remote friendly organization. And I think, especially for a remote friendly organization, you can't survive without being very good at documentation. So to your first point, from the get-go, we were like, we need to document. So even when there was the two of us, we like started building out pages, Notion pages in our case, because we knew we will need those pages to align everyone else afterwards, especially as you said, in a company that will grow quite quickly. If you rely too much on oral culture and so on, of course you're going to end up with misaligned people. You're going to have a huge loss of efficiency. And it's just from a cultural standpoint, I think that you're going to create issues. So from the very get-go, in figures, I think we went quite heavy on documentation, and which was a stark contrast to my past experiences.
That's so great to hear. In fact, I usually see the businesses that actually have been able to implement that culture of documentation from the get-go as a result of the past experiences that have not gone well. And I can see that both of you have actually gone through that in the past. So yeah, well, I guess that brings me to my next question, because obviously documentation is fundamental when you're actually building the culture of the business. But then there's also an element around building a culture of documentation, right? And making sure that your people are always getting the knowledge that is today living in their minds to be externalized. And therefore, anyone that actually will need to pounce on it at some point in time. Because one thing I've been reading a lot about these days is the cost of lost knowledge when people actually leave the business with their knowledge in their mind, you know? So how can you actually see documentation play a role in preserving not only culture, but business specific knowledge, right? Like I'm talking about industry and market trends, competition, your actual business evolution, revenue models and so forth, product, anything related to like sales enablement, customer success. I think that is one thing that we are really, really focused on here at 𝐓𝐿 as we expand, but also we work day in, day out with our customers, especially in these aspects as well. So I would love to hear your thoughts, and I think it's a perfect segue to what you were saying, Virgile. So can you share a bit more on that too?
Yeah, of course. So I think what makes it work, and both from a cultural standpoint and business efficiency standpoint, to maintain good documentation, I think there's a few things that we do that I think work well. I think the first thing is leading by example. And like, I need as a CEO to show an example of being able to document things regularly. And, you know, even on small things, you know, and it's funny that we have the timing of the recording of this episode. I mean, it might seem like a stupid thing, but at lunchtime, I went to a new place for lunch, and we have a documentation on what are the cool places we like to eat. And I went out and be like, okay, I found out a new cool place for lunch. I update the page and I share on Slack that I've updated the page. Small thing to say that, like, I'm showing everyone, hey, I've updated the page, here is this. So I think leading by example is the first thing. I think the second thing is it's part of the expectation that we have for our employees, and it's part of the clear outline expectation that we use for performance reviews and promotion decisions. In figures, like we've created a leveling framework that in fact we outsourced our figures leveling framework. If you want to become a senior in your organization, senior sales, senior developer, senior whatever, you need to have demonstrated a consistent pattern of being able to lead initiative and document them. So you can't get promoted if you don't show that pattern. So for everyone that's like, I have too many things to do, I'm sorry, like, you know, it's always incentives, always a clear path towards creating the habits you want to see in your organization. And the last thing, that's something we started more recently, is now I have a founder associate working closely with me, which is interns, right? 6 months intern, and I'm about to have my third one. They're actually leaving people. Like I don't show them off after 6 months. I actually go back to doing something else. But one of their continuous tasks is actually ensuring up-to-date documentation and ensuring that everything is clearly up to date. So that's a new thing we've put. That on top of myself, I think, and executives leading by example, people being expected to document, we also have someone whose responsibility is to keep on checking, ensuring things are up to date.
It's amazing. That's amazing. I'm a big fan of what you gave as an example, like the little things that you document on the daily basis as well, right? Like it doesn't have to be a big sort of like task to document, like where you're spending a whole afternoon documenting. You can basically like spend 5 minutes like throwing out whatever new learning that you've come across over a chat with a customer, or even with a coffee with a teammate, or whatever that is, you know. Like I love that. I think that is so spot on. Sarah, Emily, how about you? Anything to add to that? What's
Yeah, it's funny because it really resonated actually when you were saying, "Oh, there's this new lunch place." So we ended up setting up so if I take Sion as a really good example of this, we had quite a few offices and they were very different. Let's say each of those. So we had like one in Austin, one in London, one in Budapest, but then we also had one in Jakarta, right? So very very different places, all of them. And I was the first person to go out to Jakarta for a long time from the European team and from the leadership team. And when I came back, there were all these things that I learned the hard way, like have cash ready for your visa. Totally forgot about that. I'd been to Indonesia about 10 years prior and I'd totally forgotten. Um, there's other things. I'm so sorry. That's my dog because someone just knocked on my front door. Sorry, she's making an appearance too. So there's like it was, yeah, have cash for your visa. Don't eat at these places, or do eat here, or you have to register your phone so it'll work here. So a good way to get around that is an eSIM, right? All these things that no one told me and I learned the hard way. I then made it like an idiot's guide, basically. Like, hey, if you don't do anything else, here are the 5 things you should know before you go to our Jakarta office. And it was great because then people came back and they said, oh, that was so helpful. Otherwise, I totally would have turned up without cash. I'm like, yes, I did that my first time too. So I'm glad it helped. Or like, here are a few companies for eSIMs, whatever. So, and it was great because then people started doing that for our other locations because they thought, oh, this is great. And so then you ended up with restaurant recommendations and things like that. So yes, we had something very similar. And again, I liked this crowdsourcing element. So everyone was encouraged to contribute, which I thought was really important. And then I think for some other pieces, again, quite closely related to some of the pieces you were saying, Virgile, but this competency framework piece, we have it for every job family in the business. We had it at Sion, we're building it at 𝐶OA, we had it at companies I had before. It does so many things around kind of empowering the individual, but also empowering the leader, so that it's super clear what the expectations are depending on the level at which you come in at. So I think something like that. So you publish it, it's really open, it creates this open dialogue and communication. There's no pressure, there's no side chats, there's none of that. So it actually really helps to reinforce your culture if you're able to put something together that's pretty robust. And the beautiful thing is it grows with you, right? So you might grow it initially as, oh, our legal team only has 3 functions. Well, in the future, when you're a company of, 5,000 people, maybe your legal team is going to be 60 people, and then you're going to need lots of different functions. And so I just think it provides this really solid foundation for further growth, but it does away with a lot of the noise that can disrupt your culture, disrupt onboarding, disrupt the agility that you find within your business. And so having that kind of, openness top down, but actually this crowdsourcing element, which I keep calling it, but I think it's really accurate, is just super important. Sorry for Winnie's appearance. She's very cute, so she'd love to participate, but I'm very sorry for her accidental participation because the mailman came.
I guess we're going to have to add her as a participant on the episode as well. Like,
Yeah,
let's highlight
it's
her
got to
and
be
let's
done.
put her on the social media stuff and all of that.
I'll take her out so we can take a screenshot later. I'll pick her up and she can come and hang out with
Fantastic.
us.
Fantastic. But great stuff. Now that we've set that context, Essie, well, you know this better than I do because we've discussed this in the past as well. But our research here at 2GAI points to 143 minutes of an employee's day wasted on teaching, learning, and implementing business-specific processes. When I like actually got to the maths around that, it like blew my mind. And in fact, you can even put a figure, a cash figure to that, which is of £25 per employee per day, just considering like the average 34.5K annual salary. So, well, you just mentioned that you have worked in businesses that have been really great at documenting, like the ones you're at today, and others that weren't so great. So I would love to hear from you, like, what are the actual differences in businesses that actually go and experience firsthand the pain of not documenting versus those that from the very first moment have documented things around their business specific ways of working. Let's start off with you, Virgil. I would love to hear your thoughts around that. But anything related to even metrics would be very, very interesting here. Like anything related to employee satisfaction, retention, turnover, and even commercial performance at the end of the day. I would love to hear from you if you think there's an impact on all that.
So the funny thing is, I don't think, I'm sure there's an impact, right? The funny thing is, in all of my experiences, I think I never fully realized the impact of documentation on the moment, because I kept coming from organizations that were, like, I think, less progressive to more and more progressive. But at the time, it felt normal to me. So what you just said, it felt normal that you would spend hours looking for something, and then you would email someone or call someone and say, do you know where I can find that, or can you tell me more about this? Because this, I think this is a norm, and this has been the norm of the industry for decades or centuries, right? That's oral, like some of part of the business were transmitted orally to people that have been there, and you need to go and talk, like just hearing, or go and talk to him or go and talk to her when you want to know about that is something I've always internalized as normal. So during all of my career, I never felt there was an issue. But now, looking back from where I am now, looking back at the time how inefficient I was or some of the way of working was, now it strikes me, right? So in a way, if you could have, we would have talked like 5 years ago, like, what about documentation? I was like, yeah, it's fine, it could be better, but it's okay. But now I know that 5 years ago, it wasn't fine at all. There was huge loss of efficiency because you didn't realize there was other ways to do things. I think that's kind of one of the things, right? Exposing people to how good organizations work can make them think about how inefficient some of their ways of working was before. And in a way, like, I couldn't work like I was working 10 years ago now. Like, you couldn't put me in an organization where you're like, nope, you don't know, the answer is nowhere, you'll never find it, or you take hours to think back, or you just go and need to talk to people about what happened 2 years before when you were not there. And you will gradually, like you are going on a treasure hunt for a piece of information that should be there available within seconds, right? So I'm kind of not answering your point, but at the time I didn't fully know, but now it's obvious to me how inefficient I was working, and my team were working, my organization was working 10 years ago.
I love that. I wanted to see SE's view here as well, because essentially you mentioned like how some people end up becoming dissatisfied with their work because they feel how inefficient they are on a day-to-day basis. And I just absolutely hate feeling like I'm not being productive. So SE, what do you think? Like, how does this impact like the businesses like that you've worked in the past, especially when they haven't documented things right? And have you seen an actual like improvement in terms of metrics in the businesses that have done this well? Anything related from the day-to-day employee experience all the way through to actual bottom line results?
Yeah, and I can give, having been a consultant for several years that goes in and helps people fix elements of their people and ops function, the number of times as a consultant you come in and there is no kind of central repository. And now I'm like, okay, well, I have 180 questions and I don't even know who to ask them to. Like, even that isn't clear to me. And so like the impact that this has on your like the ambiguity and the agility, or not agility as it may be, in those kind of environments, I think is just, it's actually quite scary if you think about it and you look at it, how much longer it takes people to get up to speed and how long it can take to have a really minor question answered because you've been sent to 4 different people because no one really knows where that information is. And then eventually end up with the guy that's been here for long enough, you know, and so that's how then you find out. And so having been part of those organizations, you see very quickly in real time how much slower everything works, how much slower your onboarding is, how slow you are to correct some of the elements that you're there to correct and fix some of the things that you're there to fix. And it can really create huge barriers to entry. And if you have a startup, you're hiring people who want to get stuff done. And then the frustrations that you're creating for that talent pool that's coming in is really going to show up in your tenure numbers, right? So if you're thinking of the KPIs here, there's your really obvious ones, right? There's your EMPS, which I absolutely believe is closely linked to this, because your EMPS also measures how easily accessible information is and how welcome and calm and secure people feel. And that is often related to the ease of access of information. So I think you can very easily draw the comparisons between elements like your EMPS, your turnover or retention rates. But I think there's also things to time to resolution, which will quickly show this. So for example, again, this is a very HR heavy perspective, but people that have to contact your people team to understand how the holiday works, how the maternity policy works, that should be super easy for you to locate, very easy for you to take a quick look at. And really, you should need in-depth or further questions. That's when you should be needing your HR person. Not, hey, I don't know how this works. Because I can't find it. That's the other piece. Is sometimes they'll create this central repository of Google Docs, but it's not searchable, so you don't actually know where to find this information. But the other piece that you can also look at, and this might be more anecdotal, so maybe less of a hard data point, but if you're looking at things like your exit interviews, you'll very quickly pick up on, well, it's not clear to me where the business is going. It's not clear to me what's required of me in my role. It's not clear to me who can provide the next steps of whatever it may be, X, Y, Z, or what the delivery schedule is for this product, because no one knows what the communication, the timeline, the testing process, who's responsible for which part of the delivery. So I think it absolutely comes out in quite a few different pieces. And like I say, having been a consultant until very recently, this is also something that I've experienced a lot, is when you go into work with a client, you're there for 3 to 6 months, but it takes you 2 months to learn everything because nothing's written down anywhere and you can't find it. So yeah, I think there's a really real link between retention of top talent, but also, frankly, smooth workings internally, the happiness of your people, and this kind of ease of access of information. Whatever format it takes has to be searchable, but it has to be centralized and it has to be populated by a multitude of people. So
just to jump on this, Rafael, what I love about Sarah-Emily's point, and I didn't think of that just before I was listening, is this loss of time to value from people that are just coming into an organization, like due to documentation, is huge. And I didn't even think, but when you think about the fact that more and more people are like changing companies way more often, and generationally, when you look at the numbers in terms of average tenure per generation and age, it keeps shortening and shortening and shortening, and this is the future, right? And the amount of people going towards freelancing, consulting, and like the explosion of fractional roles and so on, your organization is going to be, compared to 20 years ago, people in your organization, on average, are going to be people that mostly recently came and will lose soon. So if for each of them, the time to value is too long, well, it's a way bigger issue than it used to 20 years ago, when on average people will stay a long time, and therefore once they've gotten to value, you will get a lot of their value. If you feel like people will come in short bursts, like ensuring the time to value is as quick as possible is a bigger business priority than it used to 10 years ago, and it's going to be a bigger business priority tomorrow.
I couldn't agree more. And in fact, I think Sarah-Emily, you've been actually quite nice when you put down 2 months as time to value. But basically, I've been looking into data actually across the board, especially in the world of tech startups, scale-ups, and Dio and Gallup, they put it down on an average of 6 to 12 months, especially when you're looking at product sales and CS new hires. And what drives me crazy is that sometimes you reach the end of those 12 months, that person has not achieved their full productivity. And then what happens? You're back into that vicious loop. So you're out there again, talent attraction, recruitment, hiring, training, like all of that all over again. So like imagine how much time and money is wasted on all that process. So in fact, I wanted to jump into that in a bit more detail, and it's great that you already brought that up, because basically I've been speaking more and more with the commercially driven leaders, who are the ones that I feel, and I have been hearing from the most, feel the pain the most as well. Because like CROs, heads of sales enablement, heads of customer success, they have like these very hard metrics that they need to achieve, especially in these fast growth companies that will actually have to raise another round. And if they don't achieve those sort of like metrics, they'll probably not raise. And so it's down to them to actually make sure that they are actually delivering those metrics against the KPIs that have been pinned down essentially. So Virgil, like, do you feel that pain? Is it a challenge for you getting people to actually perform now, not in 6 or 12 months time? And if so, like, how have you done it? Like, how are people so productive at figures today?
Well, of course, I feel the pain, right? The point that you mentioned and the fact of getting someone in a high-paced organization, especially on some role, and actually sales being one of them, customer success being one of them, as our product become more and more complex and so on. You for sure feel the pain of being like, you expect someone to be productive. So for example, in CS, you don't expect anyone to add like positive value in terms of third month or something like that. And I think sales is different depending on the type of the segment address, but in a similar way, this is where it's the most obvious to measure compared to tech, where productivity is a bit always more complex to measure on some other roles, like sales and CS. For us, it's quite obvious to measure productivity, and when it is, it's obvious to measure the time to value and the length of the time to value, right? So those are the roles I think that for us we see we can measure more the most easily the lost productivity factor. And I think to your point, how do we manage that, right? So, well, of course, we've been talking about documenting, but to me, documentation is probably the number one thing that you can do in terms of documenting well, so that someone comes in, they have the most information accessible to ramp up in an autonomous basis, right? And that's on business and on culture, right? We've talked about the importance of documenting for culture purposes. I think we are working very hard at that and trying to do that quite a lot in many ways. Maybe you can get back to that afterwards. And I think the other secret ingredient to me, it's not so secret at all, but it still feels like a secret, is feedback, right? Everyone nowadays say, yeah, feedback is important and so on. But the more I progress, the more I learn about the importance of like radical candor, which is one of our value, feedback, and the more I feel like I can still do better. Like I haven't reached a point where I'm like, okay, I think feedback-wise we're good. I'm always like, we need to get better, and every time I feel like we're getting better, I felt like with progress as a company. And feedback, in the case of onboarding a new joiner, is paramount to the success. The more direct you are, and of course candid and like candid and like caring about the feedback to a new joiner, the faster the time to value and the faster the ramp up. And being very proactive into sharing as much feedback as possible, as transparency as possible, early on, especially on things like values, behaviors, operating principles, to me is one of the number one catalysts for performance. And something that, once again, you won't find a company that will say, no, feedback, no, it's not so important. Everyone says it's important, but I think 99% of companies could do better in that regard, including us. And that's, I think, the number one secret to me, beside documentation, to a fast onboarding time.
That's fantastic. I love that so much. I'm sure our community of listeners here will extract so many interesting and valuable insights here that they'll actually bring into their day to day. In fact, I think there's one element that I would love to pick Sarah-Emily's brain here around advocating those around our business to become more involved in documentation. You know, like we're working on some very interesting stuff here at 𝐓𝐿𝐥 where we reward not only those who are being trained, but also those who are actually developing training. And actually, that starts even before that, which is down the lines of developing documentation that can then be transformed into training. So at the end of the day, we are looking to make it as easy as possible for leaders to actually pass on knowledge with very quick and easy notifications that are sent to them so that they can complete in 2 minutes time an extra documentation task or whatever that is. So I wanted to see from you, Essie. What methods have you found effective in actually really getting people to want to document? You know, because it can easily become that thing that people say, ah, but this is not a part of my job description, if you know what I mean. So,
Yeah. Yes. I have heard that once or twice. Yeah, there's definitely, I mean, there's a few sort of things conceptually, right? You need to not make it feel like an extra task. And that's kind of the biggest piece of this is so you have to bake it into your ways of working. It has to be a standard accepted thing that you do. So if there is a retrospective, which I heavily encourage on either big projects. Also, if am I allowed to swear? Because I was about to, and I wasn't sure if it's allowed. So if you mess up, I was going to say a worse version, but if you mess up, especially on my team, we always do a retro, and so we document it literally just in a Word document, or actually it's a Google document, but you get the idea. And just you say, look, this is the issue that happened. This is how it got like this. This is how it's avoidable in future. Here's how we fixed it. And it creates this kind of cycle of accountability, but it actually is a lesson for everybody else, right? Because there is very few jobs, especially in startups, there's very few jobs that only you and you alone do. There's some kind of meshing and crossover. And so every lesson is a lesson for the team, actually. And so that way it also takes away the fear of failure, which I think is really important for your culture and your team culture, is that, hey, we all make mistakes. I make them too. And so if you have this kind of chain of accountability where it's used as an educational tool, it's baked into your way of working. Last time this happened, I was away on vacation, my first day back. My teammate greeted me with, hey, this happened. Here's how we fixed it. Here's the documentation. I've added it to the mess up folder. That's where it is for everybody. It's fully accessible. Everybody's learned their lesson and we fixed it, and the bills have been paid, whatever, right? And I think because it's so built into the culture, it doesn't feel like a chore. They know what the deal is. They recognize that it's a learning lesson for everyone else, and they recognize that it's built into their accountability. And that's just one example. I think that's how you make it. You use it as a way of educating others. You bake it into your ways of working. And actually for really particular things, like if you have your subject matter experts across the business, it's important for them to understand the responsibility they have as a subject matter expert, right? We don't want anyone to be a single point of failure, and that can very quickly happen if you don't document your knowledge. And so creating that level of, authority, responsibility, I think those are the two right words to use here, to make sure that that's, again, it needs to be in your way of working, but they have to understand kind of the standing of their knowledge, the importance of their knowledge to do so. I guess some other pieces are building in this collaborative work environment, which I think helps when you have like a low fear index in your team. So it just creates that kind of openness, which I think is incredibly important. So lessons learned, a bit like not showing up with cash for your visa in Jakarta, big no-no. So I just, you learn. And I think it's a great way to create also a more open culture while you document all the things that we shouldn't be doing and that we've learned don't work. And so that for me is a really big piece of how it's done. The last piece for me is also feedback loops. Feedback is one of those things. People love to use the word. People don't necessarily use it the right way. People don't know how to receive feedback. People don't know how to give it. And so without having that education, I think it makes this really hard. But certainly what I've always tried to do in the teams that I've worked and I've sat with, a lot of first-time founders and some second or third-time founders or people that have done it lots. And universally, this is true, that if you have a good system of feedback, so a good feedback loop where people know how to give it, people know how to receive it, people know how to check if now is the right time to receive it, and people know how to give it in which format, right? Some people want to hear it, some people want to read it. And so if you understand how that piece works, then you'll understand how to embed it into something like this. And so having that really tight feedback loop, which ultimately ends up with one person that can formulate it into a lesson, which is how everything comes back to me. I think that is a really good way of, again, making sure that you're socializing this kind of, this knowledge gaining. And that is a great way to embed it. It doesn't feel like an extra job or a chore, because we really want to avoid that, because people won't do it. Yeah. Who put off their homework when they were at school, when they got home? Me. Like I wanted to do all the other fun stuff, but if it was gamified in some way, or if it wasn't made to feel like homework because it was, oh, it's a course, or it's, oh, go on a walk and take pictures of all the different leaves. I don't know, whatever all this stuff. Gives you an insight into my education. But this is before I went to law school. It was a lot less fun, and the homework was not that fun when I went to law school. But anyway, so it's really about how you build it in. I think that's the biggest piece, and you do that from day one when people join.
Absolutely. I love you mentioned gamification, and also another thing that we've been weaving across all of the experience essentially is behavior economics, like all of the elements of social proof, and how you break things down into achievable little wins that can be completed every day rather than throwing a big task at people, if you know what I mean. But yeah, that's just a few of the bits and bobs rolling out across the UG experience. But guess I have one last question to Virgile ahead of going into something that is exclusive of this season 2. If it works well, we'll continue rolling out into season 3 and onwards. So I'll jump into that in just a bit. But Virgile, I think the last thing that I wanted to touch on was the fact that the culture of documentation and knowledge sharing usually starts with the founders, right? And then they lay down the foundations for how that business operates. Now, how does it work to actually start incorporating employees' voices, perspectives, and views as you're looking to trickle down this culture of knowledge across a rapidly growing business? I want to hear from you, like how you've actually been able to pass on this behavior that you and your founder put in place to actually spread across the business. And I wanted to hear, how has this impacted the business overall in terms of engagement?
So I think that to add to some of the things I've said earlier, I mean, you lead by example. When people come in, they see that you've documented a lot of things. You still document a lot of things. So first of all, I think I can't stress enough the lead by example thing. And one thing I'll add, which is about your question, when one thing, in fact, I'm deviating from a question, because if I have one very actionable feedback that we've done around documentation that both helps people to hear, like to both empower them to do documentation and helps newcomer when it comes to documentation, we've created a page that's like history at figures. And in this page, we documented the creation of the company, but we document a lot of moments, sometimes very important moments of the company, like whenever we've raised funds or whenever we had like hit a milestone of like 1 million ARR, but also some very random moments that are part of the culture. Because sometimes history is part of the culture. Because the culture can be defined many ways, like to define a set of values, behavior we expect, and so on, but also the history. And sometimes you go into a business and there's all the side of like legends and stories, but you weren't there, right? And it prevents people from feeling integrated in the culture because they weren't there. So actually we document a lot of just someone who missed us, like one of our employees missed her train, and she documented the whole, she did nearly a vlog of like what she did to come back to the offsite and whatever it was, and it became a very funny historical Slack thread of like an adventure that we were following. And then what happens is like, after the fact, it could be, hey, add it to the history of figures yourself as well, because this is part of the lore. This is something that people will keep talking about, and the newcomer won't feel excluded from that part of history, because they'll have access, they'll see what happens, they have the link to the thread, and they understand that part of the culture. So I sidetracked a little bit, but not entirely, because I think doing those kind of things enable people to feel part of the company and the culture very early on. And in fact, it tells them that they are building the story of the company, and they are documenting the history and the story of the company, because they're contributing to it. It's not like a page where founders go and write their memoirs or whatever it is. It's actually a living page that everyone contributes to, and I think it sends a nice message towards empowering people and showing the way for more documentation from anyone.
Amazing. That's spot on. Brilliant, guys. Like these chats, they just go by so fast. But it's been such a pleasure having you. We move on to the last part of our podcast here today, which we're calling it a rapid fire round. So I'm going to throw some questions at you folks, and I'd love to hear the first thing that comes to mind. Each question is directed to both of you. So let's have Sarah-Emily answering first, and then Virgil answering the exact same question. So let's go. First of all, acquiring knowledge through text or videos? SE.
Text.
Videos.
Virgil?
Ooh,
Huh?
videos. I'm on
Videos?
video, team video, a lot.
Yeah, I think
I'm
it would.
hopeless. I can't absorb. I need it written down or it doesn't go in my brain. I can't, like if I watch a video, I still have to make notes. So I may as well just read it.
That's you as a past lawyer, Sarah-Emily.
Yeah, yeah. 100%.
The second one is basically the exact opposite to this question. So sharing knowledge on Notion or Loom?
Notion.
So yeah, Notion for what needs to stick in time, but Loom for what's temporary. And Loom is better. Short Loom is better than a long email. That's my key belief.
Interesting, interesting. Well, I think this one is going to be quite an easy one. But collaborative knowledge base or individual knowledge bases?
Collaborative knowledge base, always.
Rafael, that's an easy one. Who's gonna say individual siloed knowledge bases?
There's
No one.
someone somewhere that would choose that. I'm sure of
Yeah,
it.
maybe.
There's someone.
Sadly.
Yeah, yeah. And the last one, leadership-led documentation or employee-driven documentation. Another way of putting that one would be top-down documentation or bottom-up documentation.
It's both. I can't choose one because you need both.
Mm.
Right? Like this is what I said about kind of crowdsourcing, but with a moderator. That's kind of how I look at it, is that you want kind of a uniformity, but you want, so maybe your format and your coloring or whatever is uniform and your structure, but actually the content of it should be by the people that know best. And sometimes the people that know best are top down, and sometimes the people that know best, more often the people that know best, are bottom up. So I think you need a bit of both. So I'm not going to choose one, sorry, to be controversial.
You, Virgil?
I agree. I can't say it any differently. Tough to say one of them.
Yeah, I think that one was actually put in there, especially for us not being able to choose one, because I 100% agree. Like it has to meet halfway from the top down and from the bottom up. So yeah, well, guys, this has been a fantastic conversation. Sarah-Emily, Virgil, it's been a real pleasure having you on the show, listening to your experiences, especially as people leaders who've become actual operators within the world of tech. Well, I hope our audience has had as much fun listening into this amazing chat as I had. So yeah, well, I always push for documentation here at 2G. I push for documentation across our client base. It's a core piece of the people buzz, as you've seen and as we've discussed here on this episode. And I really beg you all to give it a try, because like if you're not documenting, it's going to come back to bite you. And it's not something that you may feel today or tomorrow, but like if you are going to grow as a business, it will certainly have an impact on your growth further down the line. Any last views, thoughts, whatever?
I have a brief funny, but now that we're recording, like I have to mention the fact that we are literally dressed the same, and I love it. I think in future you're going to have to make sure that all of your guests are like matching in some way. We even both have a gold necklace on. Like, come on! So other than being total style icons, I just no, I think sometimes people are put off by the concept of documentation because it feels corporate and it feels rigid. And very quickly they learn it doesn't have to be a book. No one does employee handbooks in the way that they used to literally arrive in a physical book. That's not what this is. This is like a knowledge base. This is getting your people up and running. This is reducing your ramp and reducing the time to value, right? That's what this is about. And so I really would urge people to reconsider their more traditional view on creating this kind of knowledge base that can often, as I say, fall into this old employee handbook piece, and start thinking about it more as just fine tuning the experience for people to come on board and finding a way to scale and replicate, not just scale and grow out of control.
100%. Agree. Couldn't put it better. Thank you so much, SC. Thank you so much, Virgile. To our listeners, thank you for tuning into this episode of the People Championing Podcast. Don't forget to subscribe for more discussions on how to champion your people in this ever-evolving world of modern work. And until next time, keep people championing, everyone. Bye.